Hello everybody, welcome to session 3 of the Net Zero sessions. The main focus of the next hour is how we get to net zero. So first we have Matt Larsen-Daw, Education Manager at WWF, with his presentation on sustainable futures, putting nature at the heart of your career decisions. Then we have Alla Dolgopolova, Senior Researcher at the Natural History Museum, who will be talking to us about the minerals and metals we need to source sustainably to reach net zero. This has already been mentioned a few times in the session so far, so looking forward to that. And finally, we have Julian Leslie, who is Chief Engineer at the National Grid Electricity System Operator. He will be talking about the National Grid's role in reaching net zero and the challenges at the heart of this. Each speaker has been allocated 20 minutes for their presentation, and we'll be saving some time at the end of each presentation to answer some questions from the audience. So please do keep your questions coming in. That's enough from me. We're quite short on timings for this, so I'm going to hand straight over to Matt to get us started with his presentation.
Thanks very much, and it's a real pleasure to be here and to be part of this really important event. So thanks for having me. So I'm going to, I've shared my screen there. If you hear any background sound, I do apologise. I've done everything I should in terms of turning notifications off, and I've got a kitten attacking my blind, and I've left it too late to evict her. So that's the sounds you can hear. So there we go. So hi everyone. So yes, my name's Matt Larsen-Daw. I'm the Education Manager for WWF-UK, the Worldwide Fund for Nature. And we're a global network of organisations working for a future where people and nature can thrive together. So there's a couple of things that I want to introduce today. I want first of all to talk about the importance of nature when we're discussing the path to net zero, and obviously the work of WWF and other conservation organisations in that mission. And then I want to move on from that and talk about what that means as we consider our path into business and our career, or our transition from what we're currently doing into a new career. So I'll start off, as I said, with the importance of nature. So WWF is known for its campaigns and for its on-the-ground conservation work, chiefly for protecting endangered species, so the species that are at risk of extinction, and bringing them back from the brink. And that can seem very hands-on. It can seem very immediate, going out and fixing a problem or working with a particular species to stop it from facing the challenges that could lead to its extinction. But the work we do, as you can see from our mission statement, is more it's more cohesive than that. It's working for a future where people and nature can thrive together. And what it recognizes really is that we're part of a natural system, a system on which we depend. So why is it important that we look after nature and that we consider nature? Quite simply because without the natural system that operates across our planet, we cannot exist. We have been nurtured throughout our evolution by the natural system as it has evolved on our planet. And it now provides us with the conditions we require to survive. There's a few things on that slide, none of which will surprise you, that show how dependent we are, not only on there being enough nature, but on there being a working natural system, on nature being allowed to work as it should and to work as it has evolved to do. So we can't survive without nature. So that's very simply the key crux of the first point that I want to make in this presentation. And at the moment, we are facing a nature loss crisis. So we talk about the climate crisis a lot more than we talk about the biodiversity crisis, but it's as immediate, and it's not in a silo. It's connected intimately to the climate crisis, which is one of the reasons why it's so relevant to what we're talking about today. And what's happening is that we are breaking that natural system through human behavior. We can see, this is an infographic from our Living Planet report that WWF brings out every 2 years, basically looking at how nature is doing, how biodiversity is doing, how species all over the planet and all the different environments are actually coping with our impact. And it's not a pretty picture. Nature has declined. So the stat that you see on the far left there, the 68% drop, what that means in practice is that the average size of a wildlife population, so say all of the rhinos in the Mara, has dropped by 68%. So the size of those populations has on average dropped by 68%. So that's an absolutely devastating drop. And that's not the whole picture, because some environments are affected more than others. In freshwater, which all land-dwelling species are dependent on a working freshwater system that can provide everything that freshwater does across the landscape. It's more like 83% drop on average in the populations of every species that's involved in the LPR study. And we know that we're the cause of this. We know that what we're doing to the climate, what we're doing to increase temperatures through the burning of fossil fuels is putting pressure on ecosystems. We know especially that what we're doing to produce enough food for all of the humans alive on this planet at the moment is not so much because of the amount of food we need, but because of the way we're producing it is absolutely devastating biodiversity. And I'll say a little bit more about that. And also that we just lead a wasteful life at the moment. We're living in a way that doesn't respect how precious and finite this planet is, and the living system that it supports. So we know that we need nature. So we know that this is a problem, but we also know that we can restore nature. We know that we have the technologies. You'll hear a lot about them today. Some of them you've probably already been discussing. And we know that we have the scientific knowledge to identify the problems and to address them. So that's the positive out of all of this. But we are at a crisis point, and there is an urgent need to turn things around. And so when you talk about the nature crisis, the nature loss crisis, I think we all imagine what that looks like is, the loss of rainforest, for example. We hear about just how much deforestation is taking place in the Amazon, and we hear about what that means for certain species like orangutans. And it's a devastating area of loss, and it's extremely impactful to that natural system that I've mentioned. A total of 829 square kilometers, that's about 320 square miles of the Brazilian Amazon was lost last year. So about 14 times the area of Manhattan, if you want to take a geographical equivalent. And that's according to satellite data. So that's not the Brazilian government reporting. That's what we can actually see from space. And so these kinds of losses are incredibly important to address. But this is also happening on our doorstep, perhaps in a more invisible way or in a more subtle way. Wildflower meadows, for example, one of the rarest habitats in the UK. We've lost 97% of our wildflower meadows since the 1930s. And what you do hear a lot about is the importance of pollinators, of bees, and so on. And of course, the importance of wildflowers for their survival and for them to be able to travel across the landscape and perform their role in the really important natural system we have here in the UK. So this isn't just a problem that's happening in those really frontline conservation areas like the Amazon. It's something which is happening in every landscape, including our own. And to give you another illustration of the scale of what I'm talking about, we are living outside of the rules that have built up to support this natural system. And this is a really good illustration of that. So just thinking about food again, if you were to take the biomass of all mammals on Earth, so every single living mammal on Earth and put them on the scales, 60% of those, 60% of the mass would be livestock. That's domesticated animals that we've reared for food. 36% would be us. So that's 96% of all mammal mass on Earth is actually either ourselves or the animals we've reared for food. And then only 4% is left for wild mammals. That's all of the rhinos, all of the elephants, all of the whales, and all of the smaller animals as well. And on that question of waste, a third of the food we produce is never eaten. So we talk about the impact of the way that we produce food and what we're producing and what we're choosing to eat. We could just lower our impact simply by wasting less and feed the world with a third less of the impact on the planet. So how is this relevant to what we're talking about today, the climate crisis? So you can look at these as different crises. You can look at the nature crisis, you can think of the climate crisis, and you can think of this unsustainability crisis, the crisis that's caused by us and our unsustainable lifestyles. But of course, I think, just from what I've already said, you can see how they are inseparable from each other, and no more so than the role of nature in actually helping us achieve net zero, helping us to actually tackle climate change in a way that is sustainable for the future. And if you look at its role in this natural system, it becomes very clear. We are actually very, very dependent on certain parts of the natural world who have survived even as long as we have, with the amount of impact that we've had on the atmosphere. So if you look at the impact, for example, of forests, and even more so of oceans, they have actually buffered our impact over the years that we've been affecting the atmosphere, and when perhaps we didn't have a full understanding of just how much potential damage we were causing to our own life support system. Now we risk a vicious cycle, because climate change increases our reliance on this natural system to actually absorb carbon, to absorb heat, and to prevent that from having an impact on us and on the system. And we would already be in an uninhabitable world were it not for the role that oceans and forests have played in absorbing carbon and heat. But we're weakening their ability to do this just as we need their input more than ever. So while we look at trying to tackle climate change, while we try and think about how we can lower the amount of carbon in the atmosphere and increase the rate of absorption and of course also lower the amount that we're putting in, we're also at the same time deforesting and weakening the biosystem in the ocean, so that those different living systems can't do as much as they have done in the past for us. So it really is a vicious cycle, and we are approaching various tipping points in the ocean, in the Amazon, and of course, perhaps more directly related to climate change, in the melting of permafrost. And these tipping points are particularly worrying because, of course, the difference between a 1.5 degree average rise in temperature for the planet and anything above that, 2.5 is the comparison that WWF often makes, is absolutely devastating. It's the difference between losing about 80% of coral on our planet, which is pretty depressing already, and losing all of it, and the impact that would have on the ocean system. And before I leave this slide, I mean, just to mention again, to make that point, it's not just there being forest, it's not just there being ocean. There'll always be a huge amount of the planet's surface covered in ocean. It's that being a living environment. Without the living things in the ocean, the photosynthesizing phytoplankton in the surface waters, the things that eat that phytoplankton and then eventually die and poo while they're living, and that bringing the carbon down to the seafloor, that's what's absorbing the carbon, not the water itself, although that also has been absorbing quite a lot for us. So addressing these threats to our biosphere, to the system that supports us, are absolutely essential. And looking at it in the frame of the global goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, we've got a huge number of incredibly important goals to achieve for us all to have a fair and healthy future. But if we don't address these biosphere issues, these crises, then of course none of the others are achievable. We can't have peace, we can't have social justice, we can't have education and economic prosperity if we don't have a stable planet on which to live. So sustainability is the goal, and what I'm going to talk about for the rest of the presentation is what that means for us in thinking about what we might do as part of this path to net zero. And I think often the path to net zero is described as a sort of technological endeavor. We look at the technologies that we've used so far that we now know are damaging the planet and that we need to somehow find an alternative to. The technologies that could provide alternatives and the technologies that could provide solutions that could help to absorb carbon and so on. And nature sometimes does get left out of that equation. And I think therefore it's really important to bring it back in for all the reasons that I've already outlined, but also to think what that might mean for our role in shaping this sustainable future, this net zero future. So as Greta Thunberg famously said to UN world leaders, change is coming. Whether you like it or not, change is going to come either as a result of the damage we've caused, and then we don't get much choice over what that change looks like or what it means for us, or because we change things soon enough to be able to shape the future into something positive. And that's something that we should have been doing for the last 50 years, but it's something that we can do from now. And the future is ours to shape. We all need to think past the crisis and not just think about the sort of technological solutions to a technological problem. We need to focus not just on averting disaster, but on actually shaping something new on the other side, something which can actually be, a world worth working towards, a world worth living in, that we can imagine being happy in, but which is in balance with this natural system. And the example I really like to bring up is this chap, Bren Smith, who was a cod fisherman in Newfoundland when the cod fish stocks crashed. So this was a subsidized industry, a huge amount of money from going out and hoovering up all the cod, and a massive market. But of course, it was extremely unsustainable, and the cod fish stocks crashed. And the response from the American government at the time wasn't to try and help the industry transition into something else, to help find alternative jobs for those that were in it, but was actually to subsidize further so that they could carry on fishing in the same way, even though it was no longer profitable, which of course is a devastating response to a problem with the natural system. Bren could see the problem with that, but he also knew what he enjoyed about his job. He knew he loved being self-employed. He knew he loved being out on the water in his own boat. So he didn't want to lose that, but he also didn't want to be killing the planet. He was, the quote he always comes out with when interviewed is, he realized there's no jobs on a dead planet. I mean, what's the point of working for your own benefit in the short term if you're basically destroying the future? So what he did was he thought, well, I know what I want from the way that I live. What can I do that's actually going to be in balance with nature? And he came up with an innovative new way of making a living, which is vertical farming in the ocean. So regenerative ocean farming, which means basically putting a scaffold of ropes and hanging kelp off them, and that's the crop. And you can use that for a number of different applications, and more are coming all the time. And then by farming the kelp, you've also created a rich ecosystem, and you can benefit from that by farming shellfish, which actually cleans the ocean water and actually absorbs pollutants and captures carbon while also coming up with a food crop. And meanwhile, you're actually improving the prospect for small-scale fishing all around the area because of the way that fish have a habitat that's increasingly being lost due to dredging and so on. So this isn't going to save the world, but it's an example of the ideas that we can come up with as individuals to rethink the way that we might approach work, entrepreneurship, innovation, and the way that we might approach our own career choices. So one of the reasons why I've sort of been involved or included in the program here is because WWF is currently working on a program called Sustainable Futures, which is all about trying to bring sustainability in as a thought process for anyone that's considering their future careers. We're seeking to ensure that every young person looking forward to their future career pathway will have the opportunity to drive and also thrive in a sustainable future. Because of course, being prepared for work in a net zero environment, but also being equipped to help shape that and to come up with these innovative ideas that will be actually future-proof, actually creates great opportunities for you as well. So we know we need to build awareness of what that means in practice, build awareness of sustainable careers. We know we need to make them aspirational. We need to counter the idea that this is just what you do if you're a nature lover, tree hugger, and that's your priority. It's actually something which makes business sense and which is important for all of us. And thirdly, we do need to make sure that these opportunities are accessible to all. So that's going to be a huge focus for us in both our communications and also in our direct work with schools and universities and businesses over the next few years. And even within conservation, there are lots of roles. I've got some little videos, but I won't have time to show them now. But these are different people in WWF doing different roles. It's not all about life scientists working on conservation or campaigners working on advocacy. There's Jess, who's a social media manager. We've got Ray on the left, who looks at sustainable finance. He's basically coming from a finance background, a commercial finance background originally, looking to reform that sector. Will at the top right, whose focus is forests, and he is a scientist at heart. He looks at understanding and coming up with solutions to deforestation. And then Anessa on the left works on trade policy. So we really have, like, every facet of skill set can be used within the field of conservation. You know, we need communicators, we need accountants, we need procurement managers, we need every lawyers and so on. So within conservation itself, there's every kind of career already. But one of the things that we want to get across with our Sustainable Futures program is that it's not just about the sector you go into. We can all take sustainability with us as we look to whatever choice we want to make and whatever our skill sets or enthusiasms take us. You can be a green lawyer, a green accountant, a green economist, obviously a green politician, a green landscape manager. You don't just have to look at jobs which are about managing natural resources or coming up with technological solutions to climate change. You can approach any of these careers with an understanding of what makes sense if we want to live in balance with the planet. And the ways that you can make those choices, you can choose obviously what job you might want to go into, choosing a career that does help nature or moves towards the new sectors or industries that are going to help the transition to net zero. But you can also think about how you do your job. It could be a career that has nothing to do with managing natural resources or green tech, but it has a business footprint, it has a production line, it has a customer base you can influence, it has an investment strategy where its money is going and what that's doing in the world. All of those things are forces for good in the world, or can be. But then you can also think about who you're going to work for and actually bring sustainability as a key measure of what makes a business attractive to you. So hold them to account. Don't reward them if they've got an unsustainable practice. Don't apply for a job there. Don't give them your skills, your lifetime. And last of all, whatever company or sector you end up going into, you will have influence. You can influence that sector and be a force to change. So I'm going to leave it there, but just to leave you with that one point, which I made sort of about halfway through, which is I do think we just need to think sometimes, we need to spend some time thinking beyond the crisis and imagine, you know, in a blue sky way, what this future could look like that we need to rethink, and not just think of it as the future, the world that we have now with some of the things that we know are problems taken away. If we really can start from scratch and imagine a future that has all of the things that we want: travel, interesting, varied food, opportunities for us to, you know, to live our dreams and to expand our minds, and just think of ways that we can do that without breaking the natural balance of nature. So thanks very much. I'm going to leave it there, and I'm not sure if we've got time for questions, but I will definitely answer some in text if not.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Yes, we've had one question come through. I encourage people to keep asking questions, and Matt, if you could reply via typing, that would be great. We're short on time, so I'm going to jump straight onto Alla to give her presentation. Thank you, Alla.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, RenewableUK, for having me here, and to all of you listening online. In the next 15 minutes, I'm going to talk about a number of topics. First of all, setting the scene about the use of metals through time, highlighting the importance of circular economy as the main driver of net zero, switching to mineral demand and supply issues that we are facing, and also highlighting the importance of domestic metal supply. And at the end, I will give you an example of one of our latest research projects on assessing lithium potential of the UK. Metal demand is multiplying over the centuries, from industrial revolution towards today's green revolution, as you can see here. Our renewables and telecommunications technologies of the future require an ever-increasing amount of critical metals. Without them, our society just cannot function. 3 centuries ago, the technologies used by humanities required only half a dozen of metals. Today, we use more than 50, spanning almost the entire periodic table of elements. In our mobile phone alone, we have about 2/3 of the whole periodic table of elements. And here I listed just some of them. So we need lithium for battery, and we need indium to make the touch screen possible. So and lots of other very special metals to make the smart technology working. As we move forward to switch into electric cars, we will need more metals than we need currently for our petrol or diesel cars. If we take for copper as an example, an electric vehicle will require about 85 kilograms of copper compared to 20 kilograms that are needed now for petrol or diesel cars. And these are also all the different metals are shown here, which we need in order to produce such an electric vehicle. Moving to wind turbines. The raw materials needed to manufacture just 1 megawatt turbine are shown here. So we will need about 5 tons of copper, 3 tons of aluminium, about 2 tons of rare earths, 335 tons of steel, and these are also metal alloys. In addition, we need other materials like concrete and a few other metals. And this does not even take into account wiring, which will need copper and zinc and tin to transmit this energy to the electricity grid. And finally, solar panels. So the demand for minerals for photovoltaic cell technology are also shown here. We'll need quite a lot of metals and materials to produce solar panels. So the overall future trend is pressure on resources will increase due to increase in global population, industrialization, digitalization, increase in demand from developing countries, and of course, the transition to climate neutrality. OECD forecasts that global materials demand will more than double from 79 billion tons today to 167 billion tons in 2060. Of course, going forward, and in order to achieve net zero, we need to go via the route of circular economy. And here is we are seeking the ideal, a sealed circle economy for the mineral resources, but also it applies to any other resources that we use. So our ambition, it's a fully circular economy in which demand can be satisfied by reuse and recycling. It's a great ideal if we have the necessary resources available within the circle. Unfortunately, we are not yet at that point, and stocks of secondary supplies, such as reuse and recycling, and also recycling rates are inadequate at the moment to meet this demand. At the moment, the circular economy for raw materials looks something like this. So it needs stocking and it leaks. So you can see at each stage of the economic cycle, there are waste generated. Even for metals such as aluminium and cobalt, for which end-of-life recycling is quite high, it's up to 70%, secondary supply from reuse and recycling still accounts for just 30% of their growing demand. It means that we need constantly restocking. Lithium recycling is only about 1%, just for a comparison, whereas rare earth elements, even less than that. We operate with a term of critical raw materials and critical metals. And the EU, for example, have a list of 26 critical raw materials, which were compiled in 2020. And critical raw materials are those that have high economic importance and the high supply risk. So currently, EU has the list of 26. And these lists are usually created in different regions and countries, and they're slightly different from one another. So as you can see here, so where do we get, who is producing all the critical raw materials that we are using? This map illustrates quite nicely who are the main producers. And here is quite evident that China is dominating in producing a lot of our critical materials. So, and going forward, we need to think about how do we stop being reliant on just one or two countries producing critical raw materials. The recent World Bank report projected annual metal demand from energy technologies up to 2050 compared to 2018 levels. And I'll not list all, but I'll highlight the first three. So graphite, lithium, and cobalt. These are the vital metals that we need for our lithium batteries. So in this, the increase is up to 500% compared to 2018 levels. All clean energy technologies share one common feature. It's a higher material intensity compared to fossil fuel-based electricity generation. To keep global warming under 2% cap, the rapid and large-scale deployment of renewable energy will lead to significant increases in mineral demand because of how these technologies produce and store electricity. So this is a busy diagram. It just shows that some of or many of the critical metals are the byproducts of the primary metals, which are shown here in the gray inner circle. So the green bubbles, these are shown the metals which can be currently recovered from the alloys. The rest of the bubbles, though, it's the orangey and the red ones, are either there is a high risk of losing them in the process of metallurgical systems, or the red ones, the ones which cannot be recycled. So going forward and going circular, it means that we will need to bring much more of these bubbles into the green territory so that we can reuse and recycle everything that we produce. Just a few examples to highlight that UK has a potential for future metals, and we need to carefully think and to seriously think of going domestically when we think about supply of raw materials. These are just three examples of UK companies which are currently entering the market. So Cornish Lithium is a key to UK critical mineral potential, securing battery-grade lithium from geothermal brines and also hard rock resources such as lithium granites. Tungsten West is reopening a globally significant tungsten deposit in Devon. Cornish Metals has the potential to supply industrial levels of tin for the British economy. So what are the benefits of domestic supply of metals? First of all, it's a significant reduction of carbon footprint, which is vital for achieving net zero. You remember the map with the China dominance in producing these metals. If I give you an example of lithium, lithium currently is produced in Australia and South America, and then the rocks are shipped to China for processing. And then after this, it is shipped to the manufacturers all over the world to be used, for example, in lithium batteries and other products. If we go domestic, we can guarantee the compliance with high environmental and ethical standards, and also commitment to a market that is diverse, robust, secure, and underpinned by good environmental, social, and corporate governance practice, driven by innovation, free market forces, and cooperation. One of the last slides of my talk is just an example of our latest research project, where we looked at the UK's and assessed UK's potential for lithium supply chain. So, and this was funded by the Faraday Battery Challenge. So, and what we did, we used the historic data and identified areas which was known for having some lithium resource. We sampled. So this I have, for example, a piece of granite. So if you see some sparkles there, this is the mica lepidolite, which is a lithium-bearing mineral. So we studied it and we identified how abundant it is. And we went further and cooperated with Royal Armstrong International. It's a company which is producing or processing minerals. So we produced the interim product such as this. So this is just mica concentrate. And eventually we managed to produce the first known lithium carbonate. And this is the final compound of battery grade, which can be used by the manufacturers. So it is possible to use the domestic resource to produce lithium in this country. So just few takeaway messages. So clean technologies and infrastructure of a low carbon future carry intense mineral demand. A circular economy is achievable before 2050 if government and private sector get innovation right across the supply chain and ensure that products, such as batteries, can be disassembled and recycled. There are sufficient geological resources to deliver the required metals, but we must carefully balance the need to mine with the requirement to tackle environmental and social governance issues. We must carefully and systematically secure a diverse range of acceptable sources of the metals we demand. And science and technology will help us definitely to drive net zero. So I just invite those of you who are already studying geosciences or are about to go or thinking go in this route. The future is bright and we need more talent to rethink the whole system, from how we find critical raw materials to how we extract them. And at the very end, I would like, if you would like to know more about this topic and about our research, in just 2 weeks' time, we will have NHM and ICREC digital exhibit on mining and sustainable future at the Royal Society Summer Science, which happens between 8th and 11th of July. We invite you warmly to take part in this, and I hope to see some of you there. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Alla. That's so interesting. I have been seeing so much about these lithium stores in Cornwall and various other areas over the last few weeks. So it's obviously something that people are starting to pay attention to. So yeah, I hope people will look and read more about it and yeah, join your events if it's of interest to them. I invite again people to ask questions to Alla, and Alla, if you can just look out for those and answer by typing as we go through. And I'm going to hand over to Julian now. I think we're running on time again. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Hi. So thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all this afternoon. So I'm Julian Leslie. I'm head of networks and chief engineer at the Great Britain's electricity system operator, working as part of the National Grid group. So this afternoon, I'm just going to talk to you very briefly about some of the great work that has happened on the GB electricity system and how it has decarbonised over the year, and what some of the activities are that we are doing as the system operator to ensure that we can go further and get to net zero by 2050, but also talk about our ambition of being able to operate the grid system at zero carbon by 2025. So we'll just move on, just to put into context where we are. So National Grid as the electricity system operator is the orange box at the centre of your screen right now. And we sit at the heart of the electricity system in Great Britain. So on the one hand, we've done everything that historically we've done. We've sort of managed the very large power stations, the coal and the gas and the nuclear power stations. We manage the wires, the transmission that sort of brings the large scale generation across the transmission wires. And eventually we sort of pass that on to the distribution network operators, and that then feeds into your homes and industry on a more local level. As you all know, though, this is rapidly changing, and we have a lot of large-scale generation still, but that is changing from coal and gas to predominantly wind at a transmission level, with new nuclear being built as well. But really the big shift is more localised generation, and I'm sure as you drive around the countryside, you see the localised wind farms and solar farms, which have all appeared in the last, I don't know, 5 to 10 years. And this whole system is changing as to where we get our electricity from and where we send it to. And really, we as the system operator, we need to sit in the middle of all of that and make sure that it all works and it all hangs together, and that we enjoy the reliable electricity network and supply that we have here in Britain. So this year is a big year for National Grid and a big year for the world, I think, with COP26 coming to Glasgow. So this is all the nations getting together in Glasgow to talk about the global climate change and the activities that need to be done. National Grid is a principal sponsor of COP26, which is great because it means I get access to resources to create some really cool slides and graphs to sort of show the journey that we've been on since 1990, when the electricity sector in Great Britain was privatised. It left sort of government control and became private entities, but also with key changes that have happened in legislation, with the first wind farm coming on in 1991. But really the demise of coal started in 1992, when there was a moratorium on burning gas prior to that point. But you could burn gas for the production of electricity generation from 1992. And that was the beginnings, really, of the start to the decarbonisation journey that we've been on in Britain. So we've made huge progress. And I've got some charts shortly which will show you the progress that we've made. And part of our reason for being so excited about COP26 and producing this Road to Zero Carbon reports that you can see on the screen is it actually gives us an opportunity to showcase and to share some of the learnings and the experiences that we've had over the last 20 years, and really share that with the rest of the world, and for them to learn from our mistakes so they can accelerate their own decarbonisation programme. We in the British System Operator, we have an ambition that in 2025, so just 4 years from now, that we will have periods of time where we will be able to operate the whole entire GB grid system at zero carbon. This is a huge ambition. It was only last year where we really had a lot prolonged period of running without coal generation. And I mean, coal now for so far this year has produced less than 1% of our total energy needs. And last year was the first year ever that our total electricity needs were supplied by renewables, more renewables than fossil fuel. So we've gone over the tipping point now where renewables are providing more of our energy than fossil fuels. What we want to do though as a system operator is that by 2025 have the tools and the techniques and the services such that when the market can deliver us a zero carbon solution, so that's nuclear, it's wind, it's solar, when all of that together meets the nation's demand, that we as the system operator can sit back and let the system operate without having to intervene in the market in order to procure the conventional power plant that has provided us the systems and the services that we need in order to operate the network. So it becomes really technical really quickly. Frequency management, inertia and voltage control are sort of three of the key items that we need to manage as you go to a zero carbon grid system. And you can see from this chart, you can see very clearly that how our reliance on coal just in the last 11 years has really shifted. And the changes that government policy has brought into play, that it really does make a difference. So in 2015, saying that we're going to close coal-fired power plant, and just 2 years after that, we had our first 24 hours of running without coal on the system. And you can see as you go through the blue lines increasing, which is the coal-free days. And then in early 2019, having 18 days, more than 18 days running without coal. Then as you get into last year, we had 67 days, or nearly 68 days without running coal. And you can just see this trend is increasing at the time periods where we run without coal. You know, obviously at the moment, this is aligned to summer periods where the demand is lower. We're not heating our homes or putting as much lighting on. But as you can see, the proportion of time where we run without coal is ever increasing. And I think when we show this chart in future years and we'll see the increase of renewables, then you'll just see the same happening. As we see the decline in coal, we will see an increase in renewables, and it will go from whole supply of a couple of hours at zero carbon to then a day, to a weekend, to a week, a month, a season, then all through the year. So we've been hugely successful. There's some stats on the slide here which show you the massive increase and steps towards zero carbon electricity system. The key ones to pull out really is that between 2013 and 2020, the carbon intensity of the electricity system has been reduced by 66%. That is a phenomenal achievement and a phenomenal amount of CO2 savings that we're making across as a nation. And how are we sure that we can move to zero carbon operation by 2025? We can see there in the bottom line that the peak zero carbon share on the 17th of August 2019. So we have already ran this system at 85% zero carbon. It was only for a few hours on the 17th of August, and we've been at 83 and 84% many times since. So we got 4 years where that last 15% of carbon intense generation, fossil fuel generation, that is what we need to remove from the system. So we know what we need to do. We've got the tools in place to do it. And there's something called Pathfinders, which are new market solutions that we are putting to the market and allowing people to innovate. So we're saying that this is our problem that we're trying to solve. This is the need of the electricity system as we remove that last 15% of conventional power plant. And these are the sort of technical requirements we need. So something around stability, something around maintaining the bolts on the system so that the power can transfer smoothly. But also, as you all know, that a lot of the renewable generation isn't where we live. So it's offshore, it's in Scotland, and therefore we need to have a network that's fit for purpose that can move the power from where it's generated to where it's needed. And the large conurbations are London and the southeast, and Birmingham and Leeds and Manchester, and those are the big cities. And frequency management is key. It's something that at home you don't really think about. But maintaining the frequency of the electricity system at around 50 hertz, as we do here in GB, is a massive challenge. It's really dynamic. We've got people sat 24/7 looking at screens and making decisions to make sure that the electricity into the system equals the electricity out of the system all of the time, second by second, minute by minute. As you reduce the amount of conventional power plant, that just becomes a much more challenging activity. So bringing in new services, bringing in new engineering solutions, requiring new power electronics and new software to sort of optimize all of this is where we're sort of moving to. And that is the skill set and the sort of capabilities that we need into the future. So I think that was just a quick, sort of very quick run through as to some of the great things that are happening on the GB electricity transmission system. We are as the electricity system operator at the heart of many of these things. But as you can see from the slide here, that we are making huge progress in Great Britain, driven by government policy, which has been very clear and very consistent. We've got greater ambitions as Boris Johnson's 10-point plan that was launched just before Christmas. A lot of that is impacting on the electricity network. So 40 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. So that's enough offshore electricity to supply every home for the entire year in GB. So these huge challenges are ahead of us, but hopefully you can see that we as a system operator, we know what we need to do. That last 15% of fossil fuel generation, we know where it was, we know what it was doing on the 17th of August, and we have plans through our Pathfinders to find market solutions to replace that. So thank you very much for listening, and with that, I'll hand back to Emma.
Thank you very much, Julian. Really interesting presentation. I can see that we've got a question for you in the there about the challenges of intermittent renewables like wind and solar, and how the ESO deals with this challenge.
Yeah, sure. So what I must say is that yes, it's intermittent because you don't know if it's running in a month's time or not. But on the day, it is more reliable than conventional power plant. If you're running a gas-fired power plant and it has an issue and it's running, say it's a tube leak or some problem with its gas supply, then you lose the whole 500 megawatts. With a wind farm, if it's a 500 megawatt wind farm and the wind forecast is out slightly, you're going to get 505 megawatts or you're going to get 495 megawatts. So you're never going to get zero. So the way that we deal with intermittency really is just been having really, really good forecasts. And that is a key area of development and a new capability that we need, a new skill set using artificial intelligence. So we monitor the output of 30,000 solar farms across Britain, and we use artificial intelligence that helps us to forecast what that output is going to be. Our wind forecasting has improved from in the early or mid 1990s, where it was plus or minus 20%, whereas now on average we're sort of 2.6% away on our forecasts. So improving forecast is the way we deal with intermittency. And once you can forecast something, then you can manage it.
Muted. John Christie has also asked about whether significant household solar program would make a big difference towards achieving our climate targets.
It's a great question, John. And obviously, there are a lot of solar rooftop devices, as you'll see as you drive around the countryside. It does make a difference, obviously, making each household much less carbon intensive. Whether it's the most efficient thing to do from a capital investment when you look at the whole system together, that remains to be a question. Obviously, we are seeing bigger and bigger solar farms now. There's going to be the biggest in Britain, built in Kent, 250 megawatts, covering acres and acres of fields and producing solar power on scale, on a transmission level scale. So I think every little helps. The decarbonisation, getting to net zero is such a challenge for all of us, that everywhere you can sort of drive efficiency, switch off your devices, use more efficient devices, put solar on your roof, ground source, air source heat pumps, all of those activities as we move to the future, all of them are going to be required, because the challenge we got ahead of us should not be underestimated.
Great, and I guess this is linked to that from Bessam here, who asked about the role of decentralized networks in the road to net zero. For some people who might not know what decentralized networks mean, can you just quickly explain that as well, please?
Yeah, I'm not sure I know what it means. At the end of the day, the electricity network is all linked together. So the frequency that's coming out of my plug socket here in Warwick is the same as wherever you are in Great Britain, and therefore it is all linked together. And that is why our network is so reliable, because you need a big, solid chunk of demand and generation that keeps the system stable, that manages your 50 hertz frequency supply, and that you've got the resilience and the reliability, so that when it isn't windy or it isn't sunny, you can still get the power source from where it is windy or sunny in the UK, or from the moment where the gas power stations are. So this whole system approach is absolutely key. So the whole system, transmission networks, local distribution networks, all has to work together in order to decarbonize and get onto net zero. But we need to think beyond electricity networks as well. We need to think about the role that electricity has in maybe producing hydrogen, and maybe storing the excess electricity that we will have as hydrogen and then using it later, either to decarbonize harder to reach sectors, or whether to produce electricity again for when we get several days in a row without wind or solar. So I think the answer to the question is really, all of it needs to happen. It all needs to happen together in a whole system, whole energy system basis.
Great, thank you very much. And just one final one here. Don't know if you're able to answer, because I know that National Grid are technology neutral, but can you ask on a personal level on which technologies you think that we need more of on the grid? Yeah,
so it's a great question. And I think really the holistic answer to that is, at the moment we dispatch generation to meet demand. So demand does what it needs to do. Historically, that has been a thing that isn't controllable, and the generation is a controllable thing, because you can put more coal in, or you can put more gas in and get more megawatts of electricity out of it. However, that's changing. So it's now the generation that isn't controllable, because you've got the wind and the sun, which will do what it's going to do, and that will generate power. Therefore, more storage on the system, whether it's the vehicles on your drives, whether it's the batteries in your loft or your garage, whether it's grid scale storage, the batteries that are at the end of your road or on the local industrial estate, or whether we have really, really large storage facilities which are using compressed air in old salt caverns or gas caverns or whatever, and pressurizing air and creating that as a store of energy. So I think the technology we really need to crack is storage, and just making sure that that is developed and managed in a smart way, so that it is optimized all the time, and dispatching demand to take advantage of the excess renewables that we will have.
Great, thank you. And I have a question, just because we've got a few more minutes before we have to end the session, just about if you could just touch on electrification and how important that is going to be to the grid, and what challenges that has, with accounting for all the extra electricity generation that's going to be needed for electric vehicles and heating as well.
Yeah, it's a great question, Emma. And I think I mean, we have a network today that has delivered a 60 gigawatt set of demand. It did it for half an hour back in 2008. So we know that the network can deliver 60 gigawatts even as it stands today. What the challenge is as we go forward is moving that demand so that actually the peak demand doesn't grow too much. So the 60 gigawatts sort of remains. But actually the consumption of electricity that we have throughout the year is going to increase because you're going to need to charge your vehicle, you're going to need to heat your home. And the challenge is that we do that in a smart way. It's a bit like my previous answer. We need to be charging our vehicles and heating our homes when the wind and the sun is blowing. And our homes need to be energy efficient so they can store that heat in some way so that it can be then released when you come home from work, whatever. But we also need to capture this huge abundance of renewable generation that we're going to have in the UK. The peak demand today is about 32 gigawatts. If we have 40 gigawatts of offshore wind, we're going to have 12 to 15 gigawatts of solar onshore, another 10 gigawatts of wind onshore as well. So there'll be many, many days in 2030 when there is just more renewable generation than we can consume. And therefore, it'd be a real waste to let that just go to waste and let that energy sort of blow by. So we need to capture that energy. And by capturing that energy locally, nationally, in big strategic storage devices, that will allow us to optimize and to balance the network and to supply all of our electricity needs.
Thank you so much, Julian. We're out of time now. Thank you for that, Julian, and thank you to the rest of our speakers today. It's the end of the session, but I encourage everyone to join our People and Places session, which starts in 15 minutes. We have speakers from Natural Power, Northern Powerhouse Partnerships, Ørsted and Galbraith Consultants, and they will be exploring about how net zero is transforming communities across the UK and creating jobs and bringing investment to those areas. So we will see you in a few minutes over there. Thank you very much.